Howdy folks. Today I'm talking about an Amaro that you cannot get in America, Amer Picon. What is Amer Picon? Well, it is a French Amaro, or they would call it an Amer, that is very common in France apparently, but is impossible to get here in the United States. Now, it gets called for here and there in classic drinks like the Brooklyn or the Picon Punch. And if you can't get Amer Picon like me, there's a few options as to what you can use as a substitute. For example, people might use Chiaro or Bigallet China as substitutes. And there's another one called Torani Amer, which is, I guess, an American version that is supposed to be a pretty good substitute. I haven't tried Torani Amer, but I've used Bigallet China as a substitute many times, and it works pretty well. But anyway, back to Amer Picon. It turns out in the 70s they actually altered the recipe for the Amer Picon, and apparently the pre-prohibition Amer Picon is not very much like the current Amer Picon. Now, I wouldn't really know because I've never tasted pre-prohibition Amer Picon. I have had the regular Amer Picon, but this was some years ago. I don't really remember it. So there's some urge to recreate Amer Picon as it was pre-prohibition, so you can, sort of have a Brooklyn, for example, in the way it would have been enjoyed then. Cocktail world is full of sort of nostalgia like that. So today I have two sort of Amer Picon substitutes that I'm going to show you how to make. The first is from a fellow named Felix, who has a cocktail channel called Truffles on the Rocks. Now, he recently moved to France, and he has been making Amer Picon drinks, including a Brooklyn. And in one of his videos, he gave a recipe for an Amer Picon substitute that he devised, I suppose. And so we're going to make that and see how it tastes. The other option is there's a fellow named Jaime Boudreau. Now, I think it was 2009, a while ago. He had tasted some older pre-prohibition Amer Picon and decided he had to recreate the taste of that for his own bar. He came up with a pretty different recipe to how to make Amer Picon, and I've made that in the past. It's pretty good, so we're going to make that as well. Then we can do a little taste test, see which one we prefer. I also have a pretty awesome drink to show you, and we'll make it with both versions of the Amer Picon substitute and see what we think. Okay, so first of all, the Felix Amer Picon. He called for 6 ounces of Suze, 6 ounces of Bigallet China, 1 ounce of Cointreau, 1 ounce of Angostura bitters, and 3 ounces of simple syrup. Now, I didn't want to make that much, so I actually cut this by a quarter. I did 1.5 ounces of Suze, 1.5 ounces of China, a 1/4 ounce of Cointreau, 1/4 ounce of Angostura, and 3/4 ounce of simple. And I think it came out pretty good. Let's just give that a taste real quick. It's very, it's got a nice oranginess. It's somewhat gentian-y. So gentian-y, I mean, the Suze is a gentian liqueur. And it's got a pretty high influence from that. But, yeah, I mean, that's delicious. Now, the Jaime Boudreau version is a little bit more involved. It doesn't have very many ingredients, but the process is a little more involved. What you do is you'll take a bottle of Ramazzotti, the Amaro, and then you'll make orange tincture. Now, to make orange tincture, you're going to put a bunch of orange peels in vodka. I like to use 100 proof vodka. And you're going to leave the orange peels in the vodka for a month or 6 weeks. So this is a bit of a time-consuming process. But to the bottle of Ramazzotti, you're going to add 20 ounces of orange tincture. You'll put in 3 ounces of the stuff called Stirring's Blood Orange Bitters. I had to mail order those, but Stirring's makes various liqueurs and bitters and stuff. You should be able to find it somewhere. I think it's English. And then also he puts in 8.5 ounces of water. He uses Evian water. I'm just using regular water. Now, I did a half recipe here because, I don't need that much Amer Picon. I think his original recipe calls for like 3 bottles of Ramazzotti and 60 ounces of tincture, something like that. We don't need to go that crazy. So let's try this Jaime Boudreau version. It's less sweet. It's a bit hotter, and it's got a very sort of sharp orange taste. I mean, that's pretty enjoyable too. My inclination is that the Jaime Boudreau version will come through real nice in a cocktail because it's got a little bit more punchy of a flavor, but we'll see. Now, speaking of cocktails, this is going to sound like a tangent, but it isn't. There is a book that you can see online. It's called Hugo Enslin's Recipes for Mixing Drinks. It's from 1917. Kind of interesting, actually. I'll put a link to a website. It's called the EVUS. And it's got like digitized versions of a bunch of different books, including a bunch of old cocktail books. It's kind of fun just to page through there and check it out if you're into like the extra nerdy level. Anyway, it's pretty interesting scrolling through there. In the old days, they made some pretty wild drinks. There's a number of cocktails in this book that call for Picon, including the Picon cocktail, which is Amer Picon and dry vermouth, which sounds a little weird. I might give that a try later. But the one I was interested in is called the Hugo Bracer. So the original Hugo Bracer in the book calls for the juice of 1 lime, 2 dashes of grenadine, 1/3 Amer Picon, and 2/3 apple brandy. Now, just a quick side tangent. Now, a few years ago, around 2017, the bar I worked at, the Multnomah Whiskey Library, I made Picon for the bar. Instead of doing the regular Jaime Boudreau Amer Picon, what I decided to do was make orange and grapefruit tincture, and that instead of just using Ramazzotti, I also used Luxardo Amaro Habano, which is sort of a little more bitter Amaro. Otherwise followed the same recipe with the blood orange bitters and whatnot, and I came up with a pretty complex, pretty interesting sort of house Picon blend. I'm telling you this just to say that you don't have to follow this recipe exactly for these Picons. You can have fun and try stuff out, and there aren't any rules. The bar was doing a cocktail menu based on this Hugo Enslin book because it was 100 years old. So flipping through the book, we found the Hugo Bracer and thought that would be great since we've just made this Amer Picon. But we found that if you actually flip the proportions and did 1.5 ounces of Picon to 3/4 ounce apple brandy, that actually was a little bit more interesting, pretty diverse, and really featured the Picon really well. So that turns it into, an Amaro sour, which I love, especially if you just saw my Chinargarita video. That's what that is, an Amaro sour. Delicious. By the way, I still have some of the old Multnomah Whiskey Library Amer Picon that I made years ago on hand. Just give this a taste. Still pretty good. I think this bottle's been sitting in my bar for a couple of years. I feel like some of the grapefruit flavors maybe have dissipated. That's something to be aware of. You might lose some of your citrus notes if you let the bottle sit for a really long time. So anyway, let's mix up these drinks. I'm going to use the same recipe for both. It's going to be 1.5 ounces of the Picon, 3/4 ounce Calvados, 1/2 ounce of lime, 1/4 ounce of grenadine. Let's go. Let's give these a taste. I'm going to start with Jean Felix version first. Got it right here. Orangey. A little sweet. Complex. I love Amaro sours, as you know. The lime, the brightness of the lime, the rich sort of Amaro, delicious, amazing. Let me compare it to the other version. This is the Jaime Boudreau Amer Picon version. Whoa, it's got sort of a sharper orange note. The whole thing feels a little bit more acidic, so a little less sweet, I guess. Fascinating. I think the Jaime Boudreau one, I probably would add a little more grenadine just to prop up a little bit of that sweetness a little more. The Jean Felix version is actually pretty good by itself. Like I said before, the substitute is very drinkable on its own. and you do get a little bit more of that gentian flavor. I don't know, these are both great options. And of course, with either of these, if you decide to make some Amer Picon, you can tweak the recipe a bit. In terms of Jean Felix's one, I probably put in a little less Suze and maybe a little more Cointreau to make it a little more orangey. And in terms of the Jaime Boudreau one, as I was telling you before, I did a much more complex version where I did grapefruit and orange and put in 2 different Amaros. So, you know, there's no rules. The point is that if you wanted to make your own sort of special house blend Amaro to put in drinks at your house, you could do that. You could make Brooklyn's or Picon Punch or Hugo Bracers, whatever you want. Cool, so hopefully that's fun and or informative. If you like this sort of video, go ahead and give it a like, and go out and make some Amer Picon. You can make your own house Picon, put it in drinks and tweak the drink recipes to your liking. Great fun. Let me know how it comes out. Yeah, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.